Hi, welcome to Real Estate Resource. Really glad you stopped by. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Hope you enjoy this video. All right, so today what we're going to discuss is pricing. And I know that right now in the market that we're in, pricing is a little difficult, right? Like we're looking at stuff that was listed, 10, 15, 30 days ago, and what it was listed for and what it's selling for, and we're trying to kind of keep up with stuff. So what I wanted to kind of do is look at the difference in pricing based on, like, there's an appraisal value and there's a market value, right? We all know we've been involved in transactions either on the buyer side or listing side where we had something listed at a specific price. We've gotten offers over that price, and then sometimes they appraise for those crazy over asking prices, and most of the time they don't. And we're going through those issues of buyers paying the difference and or having to reduce our sales price and having those conversations with the seller. So what I wanted to do today was kind of look at more where we could come out comp-wise based on closed sales that would be as close as possible to where the appraiser would come in. And even this is a question mark. What we're going to do today is we're just going to kind of give us a starting point price and then a way for us to be able to adjust based on the market dynamics wherever that property may be. But it's to give us a starting point, right? Instead of just saying, well, I'm going to guess at a price, which is probably been the MO for a lot of listing agents for the last 6-8 months, right? It's just like, hey, let's throw a dart at a price and cross our fingers. And they've been getting these crazy over asking prices. But as this market starts to transition, right, as we've already started to change, but as we get further into this transition and inventory rates start to rise, it's not that prices are going to fall, right? We can't look at it that way. It's that they're going to adjust and correct, and they're going to become more reasonable with the true market value and the true value of the property. It's going to come to light. But unless our inventory levels raise considerably, right? Because if we were to look at, for us in our office, if we were to look at the surrounding market areas that we're in, everywhere is still 2 months or less of inventory, right? We haven't even hit that 3 month of inventory mark yet for any of our properties that are selling. And just so you guys know, for those of you that aren't aware, when we start looking at the differences between sellers markets and buyers markets, it doesn't transition into a buyer's market until we get to that 6 month level of inventory. So we're still quite a ways from the level of inventory that's going to flip this market from sellers to buyers. Okay, there's going to be a considerable time for us, and I would say that probably at least for the foreseeable future, even with rising interest rates, that the inventory levels are going to stay relatively where they are. They'll increase slightly probably over the next couple months, but not enough to dramatically change prices, which means that the corrections we're going to see in pricing is not going to be like, hey, prices are going to go back pre-pandemic. Right? We're not going to get that level of drop where, over the last 3 years, right, we saw in 2019 was like a 30%, 2020 was 18%, 21 was an 18%. This year's been a little slower, like 7% increase in prices. We're going to just see that kind of regular, normal equity growth for the foreseeable future, which should be a single-digit equity growth for us. Like that should be normal. A 3 to 5% equity growth for most markets is a good market. So don't get into the point where we believe like, hey, the bottom's going to drop out of this. If somebody still needs to sell, somebody still needs to buy, they're not going to be affected by the upcoming market. It may, again, limit buyers because of inventory, because of interest rates, but don't fall for, hey, the bottom is going to drop out of this, we're in a bubble burst, right? Because it's not the same dynamics as 2008 was. Okay, but what we want to do, because we're having this adjustment, this change in how things are working, and that the prices aren't crazy, like, things are starting to change where sellers are actually giving concessions on some things, right? They're more willing to do some repairs. They're becoming a little less stringent on removing contingencies and doing all those things. But as listing agents, what we want to be able to do is make sure that we're pricing as right as possible in the market that we're in, because There's going to be some markets where we're still going to see that, right? Where we list it for a price and then we sell it for $25,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 over because of the lack of competition and inventory in a specific market. And if there's any kind of demand for people to live in that market and there's still little supply, and you kind of see it in the example that I'm going to do today, where we look at supply wise and how that affected the price. So there's going to be a little bit of science in this, and there's going to be a little bit of, you're going to have to go with your gut sometimes. And that's one of the things that's hardest for us, is just trying to, you know what, let's give it a shot. Let me try. But we want to be able to at least start, right, have a starting point for where we're going to go with prices. So just quickly, before I share my screen and we get into it, does anybody have any questions? No? All right. Well, then, let's share the screen. Let's go there. And right now you're not looking at anything, but give me a moment. Participants, sorry. Let's go. Here we go. All right. So what you guys should be seeing right now should say Century 21 All-Stars Fundamentals. Is the price right? I hope that's what you're all seeing right now. So let's get into this real quick. And I've gone over some of this pricing with you guys in the past. So some of you guys have all seen this. Some of you haven't. This will be the first time you've seen it. So, again, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, and I'll get to you with those, or type them in the chat. And then that way it's easier just to get back to you. All right, so let's start. So this is going to be our subject property. This is a recent closed property. Some of you guys might know it that are on here. You may have seen it. You may have shown it. You may know who the listing agent was. It's not important. What we want to do is we want to just look at, this is just a property that we're going to use. So we're going to look at this right here, which is the 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, 980 square feet with a 6,000 square foot lot, right? We just are establishing a subject property. And what I want to show you guys is, once you've established a subject property, this is the steps I take to kind of come to evaluate it and come up with a value. Again, this is just my way. It's not the only way. It's maybe not even the best way. It's just the only way I do it that I can show you guys, kind of share with you. So there's our property, right? This 14513 Cabrillo Avenue in Norwalk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get my comparables from Title. I go directly to Title for my comparables. I go to the website Title 24/7, that Title Pro website, and I get it from there. You can call your Title reps and ask them for, a property profile with comps. The reason I try to use Title as much as possible is because not every sale has to go through the MLS, but every sale requires a title transfer. So there will be a record with Title that I can use for the comps. And maybe it shows me some comps that don't show up in the MLS because they weren't listed in the MLS. And we know that still happens. So I like to go with Title. However you guys choose to pull your value, that's completely up to you. I'm not going to tell you have to change. I'm not telling you you're wrong and I'm right. It's just, this is the way I like to do it. So here is the comparable list for this property, 14513 Cabrillo Avenue, right? The 3 bedroom, 1 bath, 6,000 square foot lot, 980 square foot living area. So I want to go through here and look for comps. And what I do when I'm looking for comparables is I use a percentage to find the properties that I truly believe are comparables. And what I like to start to do is a 10% difference plus or minus. Right? I start with that 10% difference plus or minus in the square footage, which means that you're going to go up 10%, right, in the square footage. So if you're at 980, you're going to go up to, about 1,100 square feet, just slightly under that. And you're going to go down to about 880 square feet. Right? That's going to be our variance in what we're looking for in comparables. So with that variance, right, when I'm establishing it, I'm going to take that subject property. This one's 980 square feet. My range on this one is 10% plus or minus, which means that my range in this one is 880 square feet to 1,100 square feet. So for me, those are the properties that I'm going to look for as true comparables to the property that I'm trying to price. Now, if I don't see anything in there, right, if I don't see anything in that 10%, then I'm going to go up 15%. So my plus or minus variable is going to go from 10% to 15% to see if it opens up the range enough to bring in a comparable to the property. And then my very last step is going to be to go to 20%. You should never go past 20% in that variable as you're looking at the properties as a comparable property. Okay, so 20% would be your max. So with that calculation, looking at that plus minus 10%, what I'm going to do is I'm going to look and see which are the best, most comparable properties. Not just everything that fits in. I want to just kind of break it down to the best ones. So for me, that would give me this one here on Clarissa, this one on Clarissa, right? They're both on the same street. And this one down here on Molette, because they seem the most reasonable as a close comp. Okay, this Clarissa one has extra bathrooms. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, so there's my comparables. Those are the three that I'm going to use when I'm thinking about pricing this property. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the average price per square foot. So for those three comps, right, I'm going to use the price per square foot for the comps that we had before, which was number one was $719 a square foot. Number two was $680 a square foot. And number three was $780 a square foot. Now, I'm sure you guys all know how to find the average, but just so I can show you how to do that, I'm going to take 719, 680, 780. I'm going to total those up. That's $2,179 per square foot. I'm going to divide that by 3 because there's 3 of them there. And that's going to give me an average price per square foot of $726. Okay? So that's my average price per square foot. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that 726, I'm going to multiply it by the 980 square feet of my subject property, right? The property that we looked at. And that's going to give me an average price for that property of $711,480. It's an odd number, right? Whatever. But that's my starting point. That's where I'm going to start. As I'm looking at this property, I'm going to start thinking, okay, well, this is what I believe the value should be. Okay? So now we look at it and say, there's the middle. That's the average, the median, whatever you want to say. That is the average price. But what it does is it gives me a place to start from. So when I look at the property, if it's in really great condition, right, and when I mean really great condition, it far exceeds the condition of the closed comps that I looked at, or the available properties that are going to be my competition, it far exceeds the quality. I might be able to bump it up a couple percent, 5%. I might be able to edge it up a little bit more. Or the condition is just not great, right? It's not ready to move in. It's old. It's dated. It's just not ready. Then I might reduce it by 5%. Right? Because I have to price it based on what the property really is. Just because the average sales price for that property is $711,000 doesn't mean that that house should be valued and is marketable at $711,000. Does that make sense? So we went through a lot of math. We got to this point. Questions. I know that there's people on here that have to have questions. So come on, let me have them. No? You guys are all clear on the math, on everything? Go ahead, Jesus. I saw you on mute.
Kyle, hi, how are you?
Good.
So usually what I do, I knock off $10 to $20,000 at the most. So you're saying 5%, but that would be $35,000 out of the $700,000.
Yeah, I'm just using that percentage as a number. It doesn't have to be 5%. What I'm saying is that I have to be able to recognize based on what my competition is, and we're going to get into that just a minute. We're going to get into that hey, this is where we're at, and this is what my competition is, right? What does the competition look like?
Okay, thank you.
Right, so it doesn't have to be 5. No, it could be 10, 15, 20. It doesn't matter. The thing is this is what I always think about with pricing, especially now as we start to get into this where, inventory is a little limited as it is, right? Then the competition is going to be high because if inventory is limited in the market that I'm in, and especially like we know, there's some areas that we can go into and there's plenty of listings. There's other places that we go and there's just nothing. I mean, like Pico, very rarely does it have more than 30 or 40 listings available at one time, right? So if somebody wants to move into Pico, it's going to be less inventory for a higher level, right? There's a higher level of demand because of the lack of inventory. But if I were to go to somewhere like Compton or South or Compton, Compton right now. Compton right now has a ton of listings. It's like everybody's listing a property in Compton. There's probably a little less competition in Compton than there was. So, there's more competition. There's less demand. So I might have to make sure that I'm pricing below all my competition to make my competition work for me. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And I got a message in the stats, well, if it's fully remodeled, what percentage would I go up? Again, all that is dependent on what my competition is and what the demand is for that market, right? Like Santa Fe Springs has huge demand, very little available inventory. So your pricing there is probably going to be a little bit different than it might be in other places that have, available listings for people to look at. Okay. Oscar, you had unmuted a minute ago. Did you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question, Kyle.
Yes.
So when you're doing the comps for the house, and you said that if the house has repairs that needs to get done, and then you knock off like 5%. So how would you do that if you're gonna meet with the client, to get the listing, but you haven't seen the inside of the home yet?
Well, that's the thing especially with listing appointments, is you guys have to be nimble, right? You have to be able to think on your feet, because there's going to be times when I haven't seen the entire house. I've only seen part of it, and I'm getting ready. I've only seen the outside of it, or, I'm only guessing based on like the way we're doing comparables here is in a vacuum, right? I'm just doing this house based on this parameter, which is the square footage right now. Right?
Yes.
So when I get there, I have to be able to be nimble, which means as part of my research prior to my listing appointment, I'm looking at, well, if I believe that it's in better condition than the other competition that's there, then I feel like we could list it for, instead of $711, maybe $715. If I feel like it's not going to match up with everybody else that's there, right? Like, let's say that I want to list it for $711, okay? And there's 4 or 5 other properties that are for sale that are comparable properties to it. And they're all listed also at, $715, $711, $710, $700. And they're in better condition than this listing when I get there. Like, I need to know what that condition looks like. So when I get there, I can say to them, this is what we're looking at. Here is your competition at 710, 711, 715. They're all in better condition than yours. So what we're going to do is to try to get people to drive them here to make you be the choice of everything that's in this market, is we're going to price your house at X. And I'm going to drop the price by what I think is going to be. Again, a lot of this stuff is going to be feel, guys. Not everything is a specific. We're not appraisers.
Right.
Now, if you want to learn how appraisers do formulas and figure out how they add and subtract and we're not doing that here. Some of this is going to be feel, and it's going to be feel based on what's happening in that market area. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So again, it's not about a specific percentage, and I'm sorry that I threw out that number of 5% because I think that kind of threw everybody. All I'm saying is that we have to be able to, by looking at what's happening around us in the market, know like, hey, I'm going to have to take this one down, or because it is in such good shape, it's going to be the draw of the market based against the competition or lack thereof, and I'm okay to go a little bit higher. Now, would I suggest in this market going over what I believe the actual market value is, like we're looking at this? I probably wouldn't right now, unless there was just nothing else out there. Or if the seller was like, the only way I'm going to give you the listing is instead of 711, I wanted 725, I might go ahead and do it just to see what's going to happen, especially if there's no competition, and then I'm going to have to beat them up on price reductions. Is that fair? And back to the question in the chat was, well, the others aren't fully remodeled, ours is. Again, it's going to be a feel for what's happening in the market, right? Because even if I'm fully remodeled and the other ones aren't, but let's say the other ones are listed at, 700, 675, opposed to the 711 that I'm looking at, what's it going to cost to get those to be in this condition? And is that how I'm going to market it? As, hey, the difference in price, even if they paid if they paid the lower price, they wouldn't be able to put this property in this condition for the same difference, right? So if our difference is $25,000, they're not going to be able to put that house in the same condition as this one for $25,000. So it makes me a deal, and it brings more motivated buyers to my listing. Okay. So let's see. We got some other things in the chat. So it's best to give a range so that when you get there, you can sway based on how the inside looks. Well, not to give them a range. I mean, it's good to have a range in your head. Like, don't be just set on a number unless you know everything about the property, right? You've seen it. You have some pictures of it, some kind of a history, and say, no, this is what I think it's worth. But you need to have that range in your head. You don't necessarily have to give that range to the seller. Say, we could do it between this and this, if that's what you're suggesting. And what I would say is, I want to start with a number, and when I get there, I'll make a decision on that number based on the condition of the property. And sometimes it happens where you walk in and go, you know what, I totally underpriced this. I don't think so. It's going to happen with this subject property that we're looking at right now, but it does happen when we go out there. Okay. Let's see. Can you go over the formula again? Sorry, I was driving. I couldn't write it down. Sure, no problem. Let me see if I can go back here. All right. All right, so let's look at it this way. So we're going to look at the comps, right? We're going to take the square footage of the subject property. It's 980. And our comparable range, in this case, is 10% plus or minus, right? So I'm going to look at anything that's plus 10% of 980 and anything that's minus 9%, 10% of 980, which gives us a range of 880 to 1100. Again, if you don't find enough comps in there, because you need, I always want 3 at a minimum, right? If I don't find enough comps in there, that 880 to 1100, then I'm going to stretch it to plus or minus 15%. And if I don't have enough there, then I'm going to go plus or minus 20%. And then we'll talk about, how far and all that other stuff we go out if those things don't work, okay? And then once I've established those, right, I have these 3 that I've established. So it's $719 per square foot for that one, $680 for that one, and $780 for that one on Molet. Now I'm going to figure out the average price per square foot. And the way I'm going to do that, right, because these are my 3, is I'm going to total up those 3. And that total amount of that price per square foot is $2,179. To get the average, I'm going to divide it by the number of comps we have, which is 3. So that's going to give me an average price per square foot of $726. With that average, I'm going to multiply that by the square footage of the property that I'm trying to price, my subject property, and that's going to give me an average price of $711,480. Again, it's an average price. Doesn't mean it has to be the price. Doesn't mean it's the perfect price, but it's a starting point for me to try to figure out where I feel comfortable in the marketing. Do I have to go up or down? Okay. Questions? Any other questions before I move on to the next section here? All right, perfect. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to look at the coming soons, the actives, and the active under contracts, the stuff that's out there, because that's my competition. Now, I'm not using it to pick the price, but I'm using it kind of to justify my price. Like, okay, if I stand firm with this 7-Eleven, right, if I stand firm with it, am I going to be okay? Right? Am I going to be okay with it? Am I overpricing it based on what my competition is? Am I underpricing it based on what my competition is? Okay. So we want to do that. So you can see here I have all those basically actives checked off. Then the next thing is I put my comp range that we talked about. Right? You see that there? I put my comp range. And then after I do that, I'm going to go to the map. So I've put this criteria in. The only thing I didn't have in here is I didn't put the city, but don't worry about that. You're going to put the city in, but you don't have to because the next step on the map is going to take care of that. So here's what I want. These are the criteria I'm looking for. Coming soon, the map, and my living area, right? This is the square footage of the subject properties that I feel are comparable. And then I'm going to go to the map. So here's the map. And then on the map, I'm going to type in the address of my subject property, and it's going to drop this little red pen right here. And once it drops that red pen, now I know, okay, this is where the house is that I'm trying to figure out the value for. Now I'm going to draw a radius around using that radius tool right there on the map. And I'm going to draw that radius. And I'm going to start with a half a mile, right? I'm going to start with a half a mile. I'm going to try to keep it within a half a mile. If there aren't any comps, then I could go out a mile. Now, keep in mind, especially with this address, you can see there's a lot of stuff with this property that could cause an issue. As you see right here, here's my red pin where I dropped it. Right next to it is the 5 freeway. Then I've got Rosecrans, a major street. Then I got Carmenita, a major street. So you see those things start breaking stuff up. And for those of you guys that know Norwalk, those neighborhoods change fairly quickly. And now as I look at inside my comparables that have come up, the actives, these are all actives that came up, right? These 4 properties are all actives. They're on the other side of Rosecrans and on the other side of Shoemaker, right there in another neighborhood. So those comps, as I look at those as competition, might not technically be competition because that's a little better neighborhood, right? But I'm still want to see what they're at because right now, that's the only, if somebody wants to move into this area, those are the only 4 listings that are available that match the 3-bedroom, 2-bath, close to, and I'm going to show you that those aren't even really comps because look at the square footage of them on the side. They're all a little too big. But here they are, right? These are the 4 that were there. Right, Lancelot, Rexton, Greenstone, and Roper. And those were all in that other kind of section, that other part of the neighborhood. And if you look all the way over to the right, you see they're 1,200 square foot, 1,900, 1,200, 1,200. So they're all a little bigger. They're all 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, except for one 4-bedroom, 2-bath, the most expensive one. And if you look at it, you have $750,000 or $749,000 for all of them. Excuse me, for all of those competing properties. So if I were to put my 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, that's only 1,000 square feet, right? It's going to be a couple hundred square foot smaller than most of the comps there. I'm still going to be at a price, and that house was remodeled, right? That new house was remodeled. I didn't really dig into these to find out about I just wanted to see the pricing because they're really not comps, right? They're so far out and there's nothing else. So what that tells me is that the competition to move in there is going to be high because if people want to live in those neighborhoods, there's not a lot of choices for them. Right? At $750,000, besides me, if I go in at $711,000 or $710,000, if I go in at $710,000, I'm going to be way underpriced for these for a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house. Am I going to be smaller? Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit smaller. But it's still a 3-bedroom, 1-bath house, and it's it's in that neighborhood, and there's not a lot of other choices. Okay, so I could feel good about my price. Questions? Now, one of the things that I would suggest, too, as you're thinking about pricing, and I see this a lot, is when you guys are pricing these houses, like here, right here, these that are at $749,900, right? I know it's a ploy to get it underneath that $750, and it is to make people feel like, oh, it's a better price. It's not $750,000, even though it basically is. But keep in mind when buyers are doing online searches, they're searching in like what's the word, in bulk ranges, right? So if someone is looking for a $750,000 house, they're either searching at $700 to $750, or they're searching from $750 to $800 or to $850. They're searching in 50,000 increments or in 100,000 increments, right? People are in those weird rates. They're not just going, I'm only looking for something that's $750,000. And even if they did just search for something $750, none of these would come up in a search. And so when we're thinking about exposure, I know there's a mentality to it where, hey, if I'm this 9.9 instead of right at a flat number, that it's mentally it's going to be easier for the buyer to understand. But it's only going to show up in one search, right? If someone's searching in $100,000 increments, it's only going to show up once. If they're searching in $50,000 increments, it's only going to show up once. But what we want to do is make sure when we look at pricing, if we're at that number, if we're at $749.9, might as well be $750, right? If you're at $699, you might as well be at $700. And I know there's a mentality to it, but I'm talking about just exposure online because that's the way people are going to search. So you can keep that in mind too as you're looking at searches for exposure. Okay, so we went through that. We feel like our price is, if I wanted to list this at $711,000, I could do it because there's no other competition right now. right? There's no other competition right now. There's houses that really are competition are in another neighborhood, and that neighborhood is a higher price neighborhood. So if somebody wants something kind of comparable that's in a close neighborhood, I'm going to be at a price that's well below that $750,000 or $775,000 that people are listed at. So if you guys, you can go ahead and chime in. If you guys were going to list this one based on what we looked at, where would you feel comfortable listing the property? Nobody wants to volunteer. Nobody? Okay. All right.
I'll volunteer. I'm new, so I'll take it from the team.
ahead.
I'm going to say that with it being a little new, with the comments, because I can't see the pictures, new windows, new paint, new flooring, remodeled, I think I'm going to go higher than the 711. That's the middle range.
Okay.
I think I'm going to go maybe 720. I don't want to go
Okay.
too high because those other ones in the nicer area were
49.
749. So I don't want to go
Yeah.
that high, but I'd go a little bit higher than the mid-range 711.
Okay. All right, Patricia. Thanks. I appreciate that. And then I got Lily in the comments that she would do it at 700, right? Which I'm not opposed to listing it lower because now she put 0749. I think she's just confused about the comparables. But look, I just want to show you guys something. This property originally listed at $685,000. Now, keep in mind, I know it was on the market for 7 days, but it was coming soon before that. I think the original list date was sometime in March. So keep in mind that was, not March, in April or May. So that was a month ago. Keep in mind it was a month ago when they list it. Prices change all the time. They ultimately closed at 710. Right? They ultimately closed at 710. And so what we can see is, and remember what we're talking about is when we're looking at values, you have to remember that a lot of these things that closed, when they closed, they were listed at a lower price. They closed for a higher price. So here you can see their price per square foot, what it actually closed at was $724. Our value that we came up with the comparables in that neighborhood would have been at $726 as the average. So we're right in that ballpark. And it was always originally listed for $685. It never raised their price. They stayed at $685. They've got a lot of offers. They ended up selling at $710. But remember, at $685, probably in May when they had listed the property, that was probably on the high end of what was happening in the market. Okay, so as we're looking through these values, as we're looking at stuff and we look at where the pricing is and we look at what's happening, remember when we looked at our closed listings, we have to kind of go back and look at, hey, what was the list date of those before they closed and see how the market moved. Today, instead of listing at 685, you could probably have listed this house at 710 and had it close and had offers. What Lily is saying is listing at 700, right, a little bit less than what the real value is still going to give people the idea that, hey, there's some room in here. I can write my offers over and we're going to get a higher price. Remember, like I said, this is just to give us a starting point. It doesn't have to be the be all end all, like this is the price. It's just to give you an idea of what's happening in the market. Some of this stuff and a lot of this stuff with pricing is ultimately going to become feel. If I walk into this listing and I had in mind that it's going to be at $700,000 and I don't think 7 is going to work, then I have to be able to be flexible enough to change it on the fly. I can't just be stuck in, this is it, this is the price, because those are usually the ones when I'm so hard on price is the ones that backfire. Jesus, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yes, Kyle, thank you. Just as a comment for the newer guys, you actually have to have a feeling towards your seller, because if your seller is flexible, definitely you want to go 700, 695, and you get more traction on the property. You will be able to complete the 710, 720, versus that guy who's a hard hitter, he wants 715, as Kyle said. So every case is different, and you're going to have a feeling with your seller once you're there, and you'll be able to negotiate and be able to be flexible with yourself on the price.
Yeah. And that's the thing is it's tough when you're newer and you haven't spent a lot of time in the market, that feeling of what's happening in the market, but trying to do as much research as you can, which is looking at what's active, taking a look at those closed listings, getting an idea of where they started and where they finished, and the stuff that's out there now is going to help you with that feeling a little bit. Now, this is what I would tell all of you guys, because pricing is still fluid, right? Because there's still times when people are, selling things for over market value, and there's competition and buyers are willing to pay, and they're removing their contingencies and doing all those things. Sometimes you're going to have to make a business decision on taking an overpriced listing. And ultimately, right? I think, I've talked to a few agents about this in here, where we've talked about some listings that are maybe a little bit over, and the agent is aware that they're overpriced, but they have a plan in place. Right? I think, Rudy and I talked last week about maybe his listing was a little bit high, but he had already made a plan with the seller that if 2 weeks, if there wasn't enough activity, if there wasn't any offers, if there wasn't any movement, then we were going to discuss a price reduction. And that's good. Have that stuff in your head. But that's a conversation that has to be had on the listing appointment. So don't be afraid. Okay, let me rephrase that. If you're going to take an overpriced listing, don't do it out of lack of business. Do it as a business decision. Look at it and say, hey, look, okay, number one, is it a sellable listing? Right? Are we pushing the price a little bit? Sure. But is it a sellable listing? Is the seller actually motivated? They just want a higher price. Is it in a market area that I am working, that I'm farming, that becomes my market area, that I've been trying to make my market area? Some of those things are going to help you decide whether or not to take an overpriced listing. Because I think that, like I said, if you are, as part of your presentation, like, hey, this is where the price is, this is showing them all of the data and where the market is and what their competition is. Hey, this is what it should be. You want this number? I'm just letting you know I think it should be this. I'll list it for you at, this $10,000 or $15,000 over. But in 2 weeks, in a month maybe, in this market at the most, we're gonna have a really tough decision on, or a really tough conversation about where the price should be to help get us sold. Because the last thing that we want to be in this market is chasing it. We don't want to be so far overpriced that we're having to make multiple price reductions to catch up to try to make us relevant again. And I have these conversations with agents all the time where they're calling me and saying, hey, I'm going to cancel it off the MLS and I'm going to put it in brand new with the price reduction so that we get, it shows like a new listing on the market. The problem is with our MLS, if that listing's not off the market for 90 days or more, it's still going to show your cumulative days on market. So everybody's going to know what you're up to. If you're going to do the price reduction, just do the price reduction and make it a decent price reduction. Don't mess around with $5,000 or $10,000 here, because that means nothing. But like I said, if it's a business decision, I'm taking this listing because it's going to be good for my business. Either it's in my farm, it's in my market area, I have a buyer for it, something like that, that's going to at least give you some opportunity, then go for it. If it's just to take it because you want to take it, that's questionable. In the chat, it says, I can't get the sellers to budge and I'll lose the listing because it hasn't sold and it's overpriced. Should I wait, and how long? If you've been listed a month and you're not getting any activity and you haven't gotten any offers, you've probably already waited a little long, so you need to be doing a considerable price reduction right now. And I think as we move forward into this market that we're starting to live in, is you guys are going to have to start getting to the point where you're really keeping track of the data on your listings so that you can have that price reduction conversation with the seller with some authority and with some knowledge as to why the price reduction is necessary, not just because I told you so. And I think that's where we're in this place where, and it's not your fault, guys, but those of you that have been an agent for 5 years or less, you've never had to have a price reduction conversation with a seller. And so this is a skill that's going to have to come in. And that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about pricing. Like I said, this is not a perfect way to price a house. It's just giving me an idea where to start. But if I choose to take that overpriced listing because it's a good business decision for me, not just because I feel the necessity to take it, but I take it because it's a good business decision, and then I do my due diligence, which is, if you work for Century 21, you use Golden Ruler so you can see how many views and clicks the property gets online. If you do get showings, you're calling the listing agents and or the buyer's agents, and having conversations with them about feedback for the property. When you're having an open house, when you show a buyer and the buyer doesn't want to write an offer, asking the buyer, getting clear feedback, and having that stuff to present to a seller and say, okay, here we are, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. We've chosen we chose a price. We went for it. This is the marketing that I've done. You've seen everything that I've done. I've door knocked. I've cold called. Here's our exposure online. Here's the number of people that have shown up at the open houses. We've had this much exposure and we haven't had one offer. It's now time for us to do something drastic to get people excited about the property again, and we're going to have to come down in value. And then you go back to their motivation. You said you had to be in. You said you wanted to go because, right? You start reminding them of what they wanted to accomplish by selling the home. And then you get them to make that move based on the data that you show them and the feelings that they have about the motivation and the reason they were selling the house. If these people were only selling the house because they were speculators, right? They were just going to throw, hey, you know what? I heard we could get the most for our money right now, so let's just throw it up there. They had no reason to move. They had no need to move. They had no place they wanted to go. Then you're going to have a really hard time with that price reduction conversation. And at some point, you're going to have to get in your business to a point where you just say, no, you know what, this isn't going to work. You don't want to reduce the price. All we're doing is just leaving a house out there on the market to wither, right? It's going to die on the vine, and you're going to blame me for it. So I'd rather us just part ways. You can find somebody else that can sell it for you, right? Like, just get away from it. If they're motivated, though, if they really wanted to, they just were trying to get as much money as possible, and we weren't strong on that original price and we went with it, we allowed them to do that, then we got to go back in there and try to correct it and do the right thing and get them to the right price, because ultimately our goal is to help them get their goal, right? All right. Any other questions? Let me stop the share here. Do you guys have any other questions? Now, again, this is not a perfect formula for pricing. I just want you guys to be clear. It's just as a way to help me get to that starting point, to know that I'm not out of line. Okay? Right, going back to what we were just talking about overpriced listings and the motivation of the sellers. Mine are not in a hurry, and they can't lower it because of financial issues. Well, then, here's the thing. If they're not in a hurry, they're not motivated, they probably shouldn't have put their house on the market, because they sound like speculators, right? They're just, somebody told us we could sell our house for a lot. Let's see what we can get. Now, let me go back to one other question for Lily in the chat. Have you got any offers? How many showings have you done? How much activity have you gotten, and how long has it been listed? Oh, okay. Well, so the sellers are out of state and it's land. So, I mean, that's another factor too. Guys, land is not easy to sell because it's all cash. There's no financing for land. So that's a whole different story. If we're talking about a house, talking about people that have some motivation because they want to move somewhere, land is that's very different. It would, you're probably going to have to wait for quite a while on land. And if the land is the right value, then just leave it. Just leave it at that price and go from there. That's a tough one. Land is completely different, Lily. So sorry, you're in a different boat. All right, guys. Any other questions? So practice, right? Let's just start practice looking at pricing. Do these things. Get that formula in your head, right? Of how I'm going to start looking at my starting point for a price. Use title as much as possible. Use title as much as possible for your comps. I'm not saying you can't go to the MLS for it. Absolutely you can, but I try to use title because I know that for sure those things have sold. If you're looking at the MLS, don't use Realist. Use the MLS itself and use title. What happens with Realist is it takes data from the MLS and data from the tax assessor's office and puts them together. So sometimes the square footage on things is a little off, land size, things like that. Patricia said, what about RPR? I think RPR is a great tool. for helping you to refine price. RPR, for those of you guys don't know, is Realtor Property Resource, and those of you guys in the MLS have access to it. If you're a realtor, you have access to it for free. And what you can do is it actually has an automated value model that you can use, and you can adjust it. So it gives you an automated value or an estimated value, and then you can adjust it based on the amount of money that has been put into the property. So if a seller spent $25,000 or $50,000 on a kitchen, $20,000 on a bathroom, they've put a custom pool in and the price, you can adjust all those parameters and it'll show you what the adjustment to the actual value is. Now remember, most of the time improvements on the property do not increase the value, right? So just because something is remodeled doesn't necessarily mean, or it's repainted or it's refreshed, doesn't mean it's going to be worth more. It's just more marketable. The things that do add value are square footage being added, right? So if that 988 was, or 980 was, there was some legal square footage that wasn't shown on title, that's obviously going to add value. It's the only way. Or I can get a custom kitchen and custom bathrooms. Those two things will add value to the property. Sometimes a pool adds value, sometimes it doesn't. It depends. If it's just a regular old pool in there, it's going to be very minimal on the value add. If it's a customized pool, right, somebody did a really great job, beautiful pool, that's going to add. And what RPR will do is it'll take that estimated value, that model that it puts out, which is similar to like the Zestimates, but it's more calculated because it's not Zillow. But it will adjust the price based on the amount of the investment on those things: bathrooms, kitchens, remodels, pools, added square footage, right? So you can do it. So RPR is a great tool. And RPR shows you all kinds of things. As a matter of fact, maybe we'll go over that soon. As RPR shows you other things, it shows you heat maps, it shows you the data, who lives in the neighborhoods, how old, what age. It gives you all of that stuff. So RPR is a good resource. So yes, you could use that. And again, I would use that more of justifying my price. Or if I get my price based on what I looked at and I want to know, hey, what would it add if we did the bathrooms or did this, I can go there for a little bit more information. So good question, Patricia. Yes, RPR is a great resource. All right, guys, anything else? Any other questions? All right, well, we're done a little bit early. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate it. Hopefully this helps. If you need any clarification or anything, you can always reach out to me. I'm happy to help. So thank you guys so much. Have a great day and take care of yourselves.